Asset Management Implementation webinar series. This is the final of a 9-part series, and we are very thankful to Onuma Inc. for sponsoring us with their production abilities, which have been very good, and very special thanks to the National Academies Federal Facility Council, which hosted our first webinar and is now hosting this final webinar. It's very fitting that we began and ended with the Federal Facility Council. And we were going to have another one next week, but the City of Calgary was not able to come through with that. We will be able to have that later in the year. So keep an eye out for that. This webinar is focused on the Risk and Review Work Group. We're going to be hearing from James Sadler, who is the Assistant Program Manager for Asset Management at the Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works, and they're using the ISO 55000, and he'll be explaining that and how it helps reduce risk.
Unfortunately, Mike just froze, so hopefully he'll unfreeze here in a second. Well, let me continue with the introductions. We have Dr. Will Rowe from Booz Allen and Hamilton is here. Cameron Osbeck from the Federal Facilities Council, our host here today. Myself, I'm Jim Dieter, Executive Director of the Asset Leadership Network. And we have DC Mangamelli from Foxbox.
Jim, very good save. Thank you for catching me as I caught up. And yes, I am Mike Bordenaro from the Communications Director for the Asset Leadership Network. And hopefully you've all seen this enough that you understand it, that ISO 55000 is a management standard. It's not a technical standard. It has 3 key sections. And the systems requirements, ISO 55001, has 7 main sections, and those are the key areas of elements of asset management as seen through ISO 55000. But when our program manager, Jack Kelly, saw this Institute of Asset Management conceptual model, things really clicked for him. So we're using this to show people the different elements of asset management. And in 2016, we established work groups around all of these elements and provided recommendations to the new presidential administration before the elections were held. And this year, we're focusing on implementation, and our work groups are focusing on how to implement better asset management plans. And it's recommending that I stop showing my webcam, so I'm going to do that. And so we'll be getting into the work group discussions, but I wanted to let Cameron Oskvig have a few minutes to talk about not only the Federal Facilities Council, but he's also the director of the Board on Infrastructure and the Constructed Environment. I am so sorry, Cameron, I said that one wrong.
Potatoes. Built environment works too. Thanks, Mike, and thanks ALN for putting together this webinar series and for allowing the Federal Facilities Council to participate. The Federal Facilities Council is an entity here at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine comprised of agencies, 24 at the moment, 24 agencies within the federal government who own facilities and real property. They pay annual dues to the National Academies in order to execute technical agenda around helping them design, construct, plan, manage, recapitalize, and any part of the life cycle of their facilities. The deteriorating facilities and systems pose a risk to the federal government, its agencies, its workforce, and the public. And among these risks is the achievement of agency mission. The federal government facilities portfolio is wide and diverse to meet the needs of each agency's mission, from parks to dams and bridges to barracks. However, resources are limited. The ISO 55000 defines an asset as an item, thing, or entity that has potential or actual value to an organization. I really like that definition because facilities are often seen as a cost to an organization rather than a necessary asset required to achieve the mission. Among recommendations in our predicting outcomes of investments in maintenance and repair of federal facilities, a report that the National Academy, the Federal Facilities Council sponsored and the Board on Infrastructure executed, we recommended that maintenance and repair activities be linked to organizational business or mission and that they be prioritized. Asset management and risk-based strategies for investment in facility maintenance and repair are frameworks that agencies can follow to link the physical environment, the stuff that the federal government owns, to its actual mission outcome. Recent legislation, such as the Federal Property Management Reform Act of 2016 and the Federal Assets Sale and Transfer Act of 2016, enact some of the principles of good asset management in terms of visibility and use of data, right-sizing portfolio, and the development of resource projections. However, these are only parts of an effective asset management program, which does not need to be legislated, but makes common sense in the efficient use of resources and adding value to organizations. Over the past 25 years, numerous studies were conducted to identify both the appropriate levels of investment as well as techniques and methods to keep large inventory of federal buildings and facilities in a good state of repair. The underlying business case was that periodic reinvestment would prolong useful service life and reduce cost in the long term. And although this business case was largely accepted in principle, securing the necessary funding to apply it broadly across the federal government has proven to be far more challenging. Years of decline, limited resources, and growing backlogs has not yielded vast amounts of money flowing into facility budgets. There are several reasons for this, including annual rather than multi-year focus of federal spending, the disconnect between federal capital funding and operations and maintenance funding, and the difficulty of linking asset condition to mission performance, and the continued growth of the federal real property portfolio. The Federal Facilities Council has sponsored a study to be kicked off this year on a strategy for applying the business case for renewal of federal facilities to develop an implementation strategy for applying the business case for maintenance and renewal and repurposing of federal facilities, not in support of a particular investment, but supporting a case for stewarding a portfolio. However, rather than identifying what to do, this effort will focus on how to do it. Existing standards like ISO 55000 in asset management, ISO 41000 in facility management, and the ANSI total cost of ownership standard being developed may be part of the solution. Later this month, the FFC will be hosting a discussion about how these standards may fit together. So thank you for being here. I'm going to turn this over now to Jim Dieter, Director of the Asset Leadership Network.
Thanks, Cameron. I think the next item on the agenda, if we could advance that, Mike, is it's actually my opportunity to, I guess once again, since I did it before, introduce Will Rowe, and he'll give us some comments on an initiative that the Asset Leadership Network is working on with Booz Allen that shown great promise. Welcome, Will.
Very good, and thank you very much. I'll just take a few minutes to give you a little background on a roundtable we just had. By the way, I'm over at McLean campus with Booz Allen. I've been there 21 years. We support a large set of federal clients, including in asset management. So when I got to know the Asset Leadership Network, it made perfect sense that we use our DC Innovation Center to have a discussion with the federal family on best practices and lessons learned. What you see here in terms of the picture is me on the whiteboard. We had about 30 people in the room. We had 6 federal agencies, the Army, Air Force, the Army Corps of Engineers, FAA, State Department, and DHS were able to make it. It was over half a day. It was about 9:30 to 2:30. The whole purpose was essentially to hear what the challenges were, unique and common. What were the best practices? That's my middle column up there. And then what were some of the actions or further focus areas for us? So it was a very rich discussion. And if we can go to the next slide, see who's got the slide. Okay. What we did after spending 5 or 6 hours discussing each of the programs and looking for commonalities, we produced first an executive summary, and then we produced this after action report. And this report basically has the executive summary. It also has a discussion of each of the presentations. It also contains all of the presentations. It's available to the public. We sent it out to all 30 plus participants, but it's definitely available. I really invite you to take a look at it because it actually had really good substance to it. Certainly ISO 55000 was a big part of it, but also this whole discussion of risk and tying asset management investment to risk. So if we go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is just a little bit of under the cover of the after action report. I had Thad Allen, Admiral Thad Allen, who works with Booz Allen, help me moderate it. He used to be the Commandant of the Coast Guard, and he's a very practical guy, and he's pretty outspoken. So we broke the ice very quickly. And you can see here there was a discussion summary of the 5 or 6 hours. We certainly went through ISO 55000 and the standard. Then we had the Army Corps of Engineers talk about their use of the standard. And then we went through the other federal agencies. You know, there were a lot of slides, but I tell you, there was a lot more dialogue than there were a lot of slides. I found it very candid. Cameron was there, Jim, you were there, Mike and several others with the Asset Leadership Network were there. And so if you go to the next slide, in addition to the discussion summary, our sort of articulation of what the challenges were, what some of the best practices. We talked about data and data quality. We talked about analytics and analytical tools. We talked about culture. There's a couple bullets there in the middle of that slide. One that I want to just hammer because it's really one of the major themes of today, and that is the need to tie facility assets and investment in them to readiness risk, especially the word readiness around the military. What's the tie to the readiness of the force? How are these assets enabling the mission? And also mission risk. I think there's a huge discussion about risk, and that's captured in the report. If you go to the next slide, it's an eye chart, but I really wanted to focus on this piece of the after action report. This is essentially the follow-up actions. So we asked ourselves, well, what's next? We brought the federal family together, at least 6 out of the 22, and we invited several others, and there was definitely a consensus that we needed to engage other federal agencies in this, very deliberate, intentional sharing of challenges, best practices, what's working, what's not working. So that was the first action. So we're going to be reaching out and have been reaching out to other federal agencies, make them aware of the report, and also make them aware of some next steps. One of the next steps is in the middle of that chart, which is develop a communication platform. We've pretty much got to that point. We had a deadline for the end of June for that, but there's the All Persons Asset, it's APAN, All Persons Asset Network. And it's a network that is established by DISA. It's for collaboration. We didn't need a DoD sponsor, which we think will be probably Army Corps of Engineers, and I think it will enable us to post all this information, post events, best practices, invite people to other activities. And the last action I'll just underscore there was conduct a simulation or a war game. There was definitely a discussion at the end. Where do we have some common challenges, and how can we use simulations, tabletop exercises, or maybe even more formal war games? We thought about, if there was a natural disaster, how might we respond, or just given the ability to look at each other's assets, some of the questions around future BRAC or civil BRAC, or how we share facilities, those kinds of things were teed up as some focus areas for conducting a simulation or war game. So that's something that's going to be scheduled probably for the fall. We have August there, but I think we're going to wait a little bit further into the fall, but that will be defined here fairly soon. So I think that's just the overarching sort of summary of what we did essentially back in April, and invite you to take a look at that after action report and also further engage in this communication platform, which will roll out very soon.
And
Thank
will federal agencies are able to reach out to us and start joining and participating in this?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We invited several that weren't able to come, NASA, Department of Interior, several other federal agencies. So absolutely, all federal agencies are absolutely welcome to be part of this communication platform. Just reach out to Mike or to myself or anybody on the Asset Leadership Network, and we'll make sure we plug you in.
We have emails at the end that we'll be able to share. So,
All right.
Jay Sadler is the Assistant Program Manager for Asset Management at the Army Corps of Civil Works. Jay, will you introduce yourself while I switch to the your slide deck?
I sure will. My name is Jay Sadler. I'm the Assistant Program Manager for Asset Management in Headquarters. I've got about 36 years of Corps experience now. Been there a pretty long time, seen a lot of things there. Been in D.C., I guess, for about a year or two, really working hard this asset management, and something I'm real excited about. So I guess we're ready for the slideshow?
Yes, can you see it?
Yes, you've okay. You've already gone to the second slide. All I was going to say about the first slide was this will be discussing ISO 55000 and the Corps of Engineers. I'm not Bob Leach. He's the one that primarily put this slide deck together, and I hope to do a good honor to this slide deck because it's very informative. You can go to the next slide, please. Okay, I won't talk much about the two center pictures in here because I think most people realize the Corps of Engineers does have a whole lot of commercial inlands and coastal waterways that it deals with, and is also the dams for the flood reduction that we do. But we do a lot of things other than that. Have a lot of assets. 75 hydropower plants, over 800 bridges. We do a lot of work in environmental restoration, emergency response, and we also do some environmental work for stewardship of public lands. You can go to the next slide. Okay, this chart was sparked by Executive Order 13327, the Federal Real Property and Asset Management Executive Order of February 2004. Recognized asset management principles, and with PAS 55 AM was applied to Civil Works back in 2008. Since then, we've developed a strategic investment framework, 2010, and what we're involved in now is really trying to engage getting operational condition assessments for all of our assets, moving in from there into to the risk assessments, because obviously condition of an item, although something may be in really poor condition, if it's not a real critical asset, it may not require the investment. You would want to focus your investments on more assets that would be more critical. You want to put your dollars where they're most important to spend. Anyway, from there we've evolved and developing a maintenance management strategy, and which has evolved into the maintenance management improvement plan. We have a program management plan now for asset management within the Corps. And right now we're getting into some future actions, primarily our prototype portfolio analytics and a core value model, which we've just had some meetings with higher level executives with the Corps this past week. And unfortunately wasn't able to be a part of those, but I should be seeing some of the results at some meetings next week. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a graphic display of how maintenance management fits in within the whole Corps mission. You have our assets here listed on the left, which go from locks, dams, power plants. And then their condition affects our mission, which is pretty much divided into business lines across the Corps. As we mentioned earlier, we have navigation, flood risk, management, recreation, hydropower, water supply, and a couple other missions. And then through that risk, we figure out the best way to spend the money, our budget, for such things as economic benefits, safety, security, and quality of life. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide here demonstrates the way we look at asset management from a life cycle portfolio. You have our early actions like the planning actions and engineering and construction on the front end. Me, I work in operations, so I'm really more concerned with the part of the chart that gets into the life cycle asset and project strategies. And as you can see from this chart, once a asset is put into service, there's many different ways that you can approach this. We call this a sawtooth chart because it shows the different ways that you can invest money and how it might affect the life cycle of a particular asset. Generally speaking, the three curves to the left are one from a strategy of having no maintenance at all, which would obviously cause a shorter lifespan of the asset. The other two curves are having more of strategic investments on that asset to lengthen the life. One thing we kind of kid about is a no maintenance all. A lot of people say, so you won't spend money on a particular asset. Well, maybe you don't want to. Maybe the best strategy is to not spend money on that particular asset, and that's okay. But I think what's key to that is that you do it through purpose and not just because you're not performing maintenance. You're doing bad maintenance. It should be something that you think on the front end and you determine on the front end that you aren't going to spend money on that. Some of the other strategies that are shown are well, if you could go back, are the rehab. You can see you can do a rehab to a particular asset, spend some money there, and really lengthen the life cycle of that particular asset, and even go into another strategy of modernization to get even further along the lifespan line. And then the sawtooth on the bottom there are just some sequential type investments that you may make to periodically to increase the life of a particular asset. Now you can go to the next slide. Okay, I don't know how many of you folks are familiar with the Palisades risk tools. This is a decision tree, but anyway, it shows how improving life cycle portfolio investment decisions. We pretty much have two decisions right now within the Corps where we either fund or we don't fund a particular maintenance activity. Well, under those two items, you have really four possibilities of outcomes. If you can fund it, you have a probability that it would not fail. Or if you fund it, you would think it still could fail, but you would think that the probability of that would be much less. Also, the do not fund, you have those two outputs as well. You would think if you don't fund it, probably the does fail would be a higher probability of happening, and then the does not fail would be less likely. And the reason that we bring this is to show, as you continue to go down this chart, that as you choose to make investments, that you measure risk in each of your investments, and you can actually apply probabilities to this. We looked at the final results of this, where if an item does not fail and performance sustains, performance improves, or performance degrades out of that, and looked at all the options. And I believe that we found there was some incredible number, like about 2 million possible outcomes that could develop from this one decision of whether you're going to make an investment or not in the front end. Kind of complex, but again, this does show an area that risk could be involved in your decision on making investments. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a relatively new development that we're getting into with the value model, and as I mentioned, we've been interviewing executives within the Corps of Engineers to determine those items that they really consider have the highest value to the Corps mission. So you have some generic sub-objectives in here, like we want to minimize cost of the nation, protect people, protect the environment, facilitate commerce. What you have is the spokes around this inner circle are performance measures for each of the business lines, and then the example metrics that we're trying to determine. We're hoping that this will really show us where we can find those really high value items, assets within the Corps of Engineers that we can justify to spend our budget in the wisest way. Again, this is very recent, as I showed you on the earlier chart. This is something that we're actively involved in right now. Just had meetings last week, so hoping that some of the outputs of this discussion will be able to be applied in maybe our 2020 or 2021 budget. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is the last slide of this program, but what we're showing here is how some core initiatives overlay with the ISO 55001 process elements. And these, I guess the grayer boxes on the outside show different core policies or core initiatives that affect the core values of the 55001 process elements. It's kind of detailed to go to. The slide should be available to everyone in here. So what I would ask is if anyone, after they looked at this slide, wanted to discuss any more, I'd be happy to discuss these specifically with them. So that's the end of this presentation, and I don't know where we go from here. If we do questions or...
Well, what I would like to do is have a discussion with you, and Mike Imany is there, and the people who are at the round table to talk about practical ways that this type of activity can measurably reduce risk. Jim Dieter, can you start that discussion?
Sure. Thank you very much. Will says I should be on the camera. There you go. The connection of value and risk, I think, is very interesting. They're both core concepts of 55,000, especially 55,001. But it does give us some pause for thought on how those connect, in a U.S. government setting. Anybody like to share any thoughts on that? Well, Mike is. Mike Imany?
This is Mike Imany. I'll make more of a comment than I'm going to share. Maybe I'm going to make more of a question and a comment than I'm going to share anything pithy here.
Good.
The decision making within, say, for example, the Corps of Engineers channels or the Department of Defense's facilities management channels or Department of Interior facilities management channels, I think are very clear and understood, and working their way up to the decision maker is mighty fine and dandy. But generally speaking, the funds that are needed in the facilities arena, and particularly as we tie risk to mission, the mission folks who tend to have the ability to influence programs and funds aren't necessarily in that decision chain. And so my comment I'm making to the group at large is there's a basic misalignment of the mission owners and their concerns with the facilities and management activity. Now, it comes closer in the Navy within the DoD construct because of the working capital fund nature of the Navy's facilities management activities, where essentially the tenants and claimants have to basically put their money into the pot and demand services. But I make that as a comment, and in fact, I will argue when I was in the team that wrote the predicting outcomes, that was the thing that I saw the most, was this issue of a disconnect between where the programs and funds lay and where the excellent work of the engineer defining the requirements lay. I've never seen an engineer who can't fix a problem with a broken building and solve the day, and if you will, defer the major investment through Band-Aid fixes. We're our worst enemy with regards to allowing the decision makers in the mission to be able to move forward and live with the consequences of poor funding. Now, I rambled some here, but I thought it might open a conversation.
Yeah, very good. Will, I see you reaching for the button. You have a comment? Would you like that?
Right. I was just thinking back to the roundtable, and Mike, you were just talking about the defense perspective. We had the Army headquarters, and we had Air Force representing the installation community present. And one of the things that they mentioned, and they've basically had to deal with for years, has been funding taken from the installation support for the operational mission. So to some extent, for years, they've been deliberately taking some risk, if you will, in funding certain mission-specific activities, warfighting activities, over maintaining the facilities. However, the flip side of that was we're putting together information on our condition, we're trying to get our data in good shape, and we're trying to tie the facility footprint to the mission. What's the mission dependency of the facilities? What's critical? And so I think that's a big exercise that's ongoing now within the military, is to make sure that the physical plant and the asset base, physical asset base, has a link, a deliberate tie to enabling mission. And so there's a lot of efforts on that. I just think, often we say mission dependency index, or this is critical infrastructure that has to be maintained. I think that's an ongoing effort, but it's a very important thing that came out of the roundtable.
Jay, I was particularly, going on from both of those comments, your slide that shows risk, not over on the asset side, but on the mission support side. Could you talk to, perhaps how that's helped or been a product of, how you've gotten more visibility for asset management within the Army Corps?
Yes, and what is, I guess one of the big drivers is Corps-wide risk is risk informed is such a critical item. I mean, it's pretty much through the levee safety and dam safety activities. I always consider them, they're the most proficient guys within the Corps as far as being able to use risk in there. And we've taken lessons from how they've successfully identified risk on these life-threatening projects and had communicated that as part of their budgeting process. Now, what we're doing there, I guess a lot of our risk isn't necessarily life safety as much as it's how's it going to affect the mission. So the basic backbone of risk being in the Corps now and it being so successful through the FRM folks. And let me kind of make this comment here as well. I was in a meeting with Mr. James Dalton, who is the Deputy for Civil Works lately. And as we were first starting the mission, he had mentioned this course that's being given, or actually a program, a risk management program that's being given through the Corps of Engineers to about 20 select people each year. And the first thing that he said is risk is the key for how we're going to do all of our projects. And these people that we're training up in this risk, they're going to be consultants as far as how to apply that. I think I'm saying a lot of words, but I'm thinking that risk is more emerging right now, and we're still trying to get our arms around how to really utilize it within our organization. But be assured that there is a decision on budget now that risk is informing it to some extent.
This is
Jim,
Mike Fortnaro, and Bob Leach has been able to join us. So, Bob, you've been made a panelist, and you can speak on this point if you would like to. Maybe Bob doesn't have his microphone set up, but feel free to jump in at any time. I'm sorry, Jim, go ahead.
No problem. I was going to, a variant of this that came up in the development of ISO 55000 was the concept of opportunity. And when you read through the standard, every time it says risk, it says an opportunity. So a lot of people who were heavily involved came at it from a risk perspective, said, well, opportunity is a default part of risk, and you can see that point. On the other hand, it defies logic a little bit, because we all think of risk as, avoiding negative occurrences rather than leveraging positive opportunities. Does anybody like to pick up that ball a little bit and think about how opportunity fits in that risk picture that's described by the Army Corps of Engineers or in other circumstances?
Hey,
Jim, I might have a couple of words. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jack, and then we'll have Marlene after that. Jack Kelly, please.
Okay, sorry. So forgive me if I don't come through too well. I'm in a remote location. So one of the things that you should be aware of is that OMB has in the last several years tried to make agencies more aware of the importance of risk. And that could be one of the reasons why the senior levels at the Corps of Engineers are now talking about this. There was a brand new version of OMB Circular A123, which now actually carries the title that has something to do with enterprise-wide risk management. And OMB is new to this realization. So now the word is starting to percolate out in the agencies that risk is important, and agencies are starting to figure out what that means operationally and in terms of how they should frame their budget requests. And I'm happy to hear that some agencies are now getting more, doing a better job of linking risk to their budget requests. And that was one of the takeaways I had from the roundtable that we had with Booz Allen. Several of those senior federal executives, basically what I heard them say is that by presenting to their senior management and to their budget people who are in their own chain, they're able to get more support or make a more compelling case for certain investments when they can tie those investments to reducing risk or mitigating risk. So I think the message of risk is one that OMB is now talking about, has been for a little while. I quite frankly don't think OMB still understands all of what it means, and I think even within OMB, I don't think they're doing a good job of communicating that message across their various stovepipes. They have a performance measurement, stovepipe too, and that has a very important relationship to risk, the risk of not achieving your performance goals. I don't get a sense within OMB they fully understand that yet. But this is a very critical issue. It's the right time to be bringing this to management attention. I mean, OMB is talking those words, and agencies that are getting more familiar with this are using OMB's words to make the case. The one other thing I'd like to add is when you think about that IAM asset management model, and the reason I get excited about it is because what it shows you is you have to do all of these things together. Risk is an important perspective, but it's got to inform investment decisions, it's got to inform operational activities, you have to have the people in place to actually know how to process risk and assess it. You got to have the data to support it. So all of those things that are on that chart are critical to the successful implementation of an asset management program. I'll be quiet now.
Thanks, Jack. For those that don't know him, that's Jack Kelly, who works with the ALN and spent 30-some years at OMB. So Marlene Melamici from Deloitte, please.
Hi, thank you, Jim. And Jack, that was the perfect lead-in to some thoughts that I had. Last fall, when we had the opportunity with the ALN to do our presentation, our little group, and we had the risk and review presentation last fall, I touched on this very topic that we're getting into now as far as the relationship between the new A123 internal controls and emphasis on risk and how that should play together. And Jack, I appreciate your words you just used, because that really is, in my mind as well, the answer as to how you use risk, which is what I believe the Army Corps was just mentioning. How do you use risk? How you do that, and OMB, even though maybe they don't quite understand it just yet, has touched on that point by saying, we know risk plays in here somewhere, but I think you just said it, Jack, how you use risk to tie and frame your budget request. At the end of the day, that really is what risk is going to do in the federal government, how you frame your budget requests. And I think those that get to the point where they understand how to do that and get the framework within their organization through their internal controls, even in DOD with the fire and the audit readiness and their A123 plans as well, when they finally understand that, they will be able to develop that decision framework, align all those priorities to frame budgets and the appropriations that come together. Unfortunately, I think in the DOD, a lot of times things are done, and I think you'll probably understand that, based on colors of money sometimes that get in the way of how things are done and across lines and the silos related to that. But I'd like to go back for a moment, Jim, to your question about how opportunity plays in risk. And I think that's something, to your point, people lose sight of as well, because it's terminology sometimes, the other side of the coin, so to speak. But from the opportunity side, once you've got your strategic risk approach in place and you've tied your programs and you've aligned things, you have that asset risk opportunity for valuation, where your opportunities come in. And that's where your things related to things such as your capital efficiency planning and those sorts of initiatives come in. And there, people who are involved with those activities, of course, you realize you're talking about the evaluation of opportunities tied to things on constraints, such as your risk scores, your budgets, your timing, your people, your business climate. All of those things come into play under your opportunities identified when you're doing your risk analysis. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, where all of that leads is to that long range as well as your short-term planning, okay, for your investments.
Thanks, Marlene. Sherry Ticknor from Jacobs.
Hi, everyone. This is Sherry Ticknor with Jacobs. We've been fortunate to be working with Jay and Bob Leach on their Civil Works Asset Management Program with Mr. Eric Dillinger and Emily Seenster. And hopefully Bob has his mic working, or Jay can chime in here. But what's been beautiful and just a nice program with the Civil Works is they actually have gone down into looking at the value and the risk and the mission and the probability of all these assets in the Civil Works program. And what they've been able to do from an opportunity standpoint is really rethink their maintenance strategy based on some of those risks that are out there and really pull that together. And then as well, they've gone out to all their MSCs and really are teaching them up or training them up on this whole new process of prioritization and rating and how they put that forward for a budget request. So it's very holistic, Jay. I mean, jump in if I'm getting this wrong, because I'm not part of that team putting it together, so I'm really looking at it from the outside from the team. But it's really this holistic approach of how they're looking at all their assets, down to the risk and the value and the budgeting and a whole maintenance strategy. So it's really a showcase example, I think, that USACE is putting out there from the Civil Works for others to kind of look at and maybe, model after. It's been a very successful program that they put together.
This is Mike Bordenaro again. I'm sorry. Was somebody going to say something?
This is Jay. I was just going to thank Sherry for the nice words and mention that I was actually out in New Mexico last week, and we had done pilots on a project out there that doing the very things that Sherry was discussing, got down to the grassroots as far as managing assets at FRM type projects. And when we got out there, they asked us, we know this is a pilot, but can we do this for all of our projects? So it was really a surprise to me, a very pleasant surprise that they really were getting something out of what we were trying to do, and it made sense to them, and they were excited about it. I was also going to see if Bob ever got on the phone and see if he wanted to chime in as well.
All right. So, Bob, if you ever do, just feel free to speak up. But now we're going to do a little bit of a switch here. Cameron.
Mike.
Yes.
Mike. Can I get the last word in on this section?
Yes, please.
I had one piece of information I wanted to share. Is that as of 2 days ago, I think, there was a Federal Register call for comments regarding the FMR, the Federal Management Regulations, and the FPMR, the Federal Property Management Regulations. It's going to be out for 2 months. The point of contact is Bob Holcomb at the GSA Office of Government-Wide Policy, and it's a real opportunity for people to comment about the regulations around asset management. We'll be putting together ALN comments. Anybody that's interested in participating with us, we'll be putting a team together on that, but it's also the opportunity for individuals or organizations to comment. So thanks. Thank you, Mike. Back to you.
Jim, thank you. That was the perfect end for that section. And what we're going to do now is show some, boots on the ground risk management. Fox Blocks was a partner for our risk and review work group last year, and they're doing the same again this year. And they are doing something that's also innovative in asset management and associations. The Insulated Concrete Form Manufacturers Association is going to be establishing a template for addressing risk management using ISO 55000. So people will be able to show in a measurable way if they use certain types of their industry products, they can be assured that they will be able to manage certain types of risks. And DC Mangamelli is going to be showing a video that clearly shows the ability to manage risk with this type of structural system. DC?
Yeah, sure, Mike. Can you hear me okay? My mic is on?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Good. Appreciate the opportunity to demonstrate this video. It's a recent news clip from a Phoenix CBS affiliate that shows kind of the risk management benefits of ICFs, or insulating concrete forms, that are helping meeting the emerging needs, of the federal government, especially as it relates to the UFC, the Unified Facilities Criteria, minimum guidelines for anti-terrorism. This specific clip, has a residential tone by one of our dealers and contractors in the Phoenix area, but it addresses the resiliency needs, of the federal agencies. So go ahead and play that, Mike.
New at 10, with the threat of terrorist attacks and civil unrest, some here in the Valley are choosing construction that is virtually indestructible. As Preston Phillips reports, two Valley brothers are building homes and bunkers that can save your life and conserve energy.
More and more people in the valley are opting for a different kind of construction, one that can withstand just about any major attack or natural disaster, even a barrage of gunfire.
These walls are bulletproof. They'd be very tough to drive a car through it.
It's called ICF, short for insulated concrete form. Essentially, two thick pieces of shock-absorbent styrofoam, rebar up the middle, filled with concrete.
There's a very high level of security here. Even for fire rating, these typical building has a 20-minute fire rating. An ICF building has a 4-hour fire rating.
For Fountain Hills resident Mike Howell, it's all about peace of mind. His custom home in Fountain Hills is all ICF construction. His recording studio below it all doubles as a bunker.
Not that I'm paranoid about being attacked, but in the event that it happened, I really don't have any worries.
Gary Fetters and his brother Rod, both U.S. Air Force veterans, own Castle Rock homes and Division I bunkers out of Litchfield Park and are the ones behind the construction.
I have a picture of Hurricane Katrina with 1 square mile wiped completely clear off the face of the earth, except for the foundations, and one house standing there, and that house is ICF.
Take this California neighborhood, for example, wiped out by fire, except for these 3 homes built with ICF. Meantime, this Avondale church is one of 26 right here in the valley being built with this fortified construction. And while it's expected to stop almost any threat, the church says their decision was based solely on energy efficiency.
The concrete literally wicks temperature out of the ground, and you create a thermal mass that holds the temperature and lowers your operating costs significantly.
Preston Phillips, CBS 5 News.
And Fetters says that they have sold more ICF construction in the last 6 months than they have in the past 3 years. For more information on the cost and other things, we do have a link to the story on our website, azfamily.com.
So yeah, and of course, looking at that, obviously not trying to use scare tactics among the private sector, but Foxbox is sure happy, to link the ICFA, or the Insulating Concrete Form Manufacturers Association, with the Asset Leadership Network here, really to solve, your risk management issues among the federal agencies. Last week, during the SAME JETC conference in Columbus, we actually delivered an educational track of structural resilience versus man-made and natural disasters. So that was really well received during that conference, and we're going to further make that presentation, among other information, available for the 4th annual Federal Asset Leadership Week, starting in November. So November 13th, I think. So look forward to the opportunity to continue the dialogue as it relates to ICFs.
And DC, thank you for taking the lead in having associations work with the Asset Leadership Network to move the ball forward on an industry level for asset management. Specifically, I think it's clear that structural risk management is measurably capable. So we now have time to take some questions, and we've made James Salmon, a lawyer who is a friend of the Asset Leadership Network, a presenter. James, can you speak?
Can you hear me, Mike?
Yes.
Okay, great. The only comment I wanted to add to all of this is that in the context of our contracting process, whether we're talking our federal procurement laws, rules, and regulations, or private sector procurement laws, procurement contracts that are put out and in place, the concept of risk management being an opportunity, a double-sided coin, is something that you can lay out in your legal instruments and put your providers of services on notice that as an owner or consumer of their services, you anticipate that they're going to consider risk and that they're going to consider it as the flip side of that opportunity coin. And if you structure your compensation package properly and you incentivize what you ought to incentivize, then you will have people respond to those procurement requests with some pretty innovative approaches to managing risks and turning things and identifying the opportunities that are the flip side of those risks.
James, are there examples that we could share with the federal government to show how this works?
Sure, this is unfolding as we speak in Canada. There are municipalities in Canada that are procuring planning, design, and construction services from integrated teams, and one of the focuses of both the RFQ and the request for qualification and the RFPs that are issued is this issue of risk and treating it as the flip side of that opportunity coin.
Thank you for that. Are there any questions from inside the conference room? I've been tracking the questions, and well, since I haven't, Jay, you did a good job on your presentation. Somebody wants the slides, so I think you represented pretty well there. And we've got a very interesting end to this webinar series. Young, if you can make Kimon Onuma the presenter. He's going to talk about how his current or his upcoming webinar series is a direct continuation of Risk and Review, and that the Risk and Review work group will be able to actually participate in demonstrations of how to manage risk in the ways that Kimon will discuss now.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for this whole webinar series. And we're at the closing of a pretty aggressive schedule that we've had for the Asset Leadership Network. And just to let everybody know, there are other webinars that have been happening at the same time. So it's pretty amazing the pace, the tempo that we've had over the last few months of one right after the other, of different groups actually involved, AIA and the National Institute of Building Sciences and Asset Leadership Network and Federal Facilities Council. So we have all these linked here, and this webinar today will be also posted as a recording. And just to let everybody know, we've had, in parallel to this, we just finished a webinar series yesterday that was focused on managing requirements and facilities from owners all the way into the life cycle. And one thing that we're leaving this series with is a sandbox, basically a sandbox where you can actually test things out. It's called BIM Storm. If you go to bimstorm.com and sign up, you can actually participate. And what happens in these BIM storms that is interesting is that they are, we feel, and this is actually taking a quote from Admiral Thad Allen, is if we're wanting to manage risk, we need access to information. And transparency breeds self-correcting behavior. And the challenge a lot of times with these government agencies databases is that nobody can actually see and access them, even to test them. So we've created a sandbox over the years, and we're having a new one starting up next week. It's BIM Storm AEC Game Changers, and everybody's welcome to participate. We're going to actually be talking about cybersecurity and risk and access to information and how you make data accessible. And Mike Chipley from the PMC group will be talking about cybersecurity. And we'll have a series of webinars and hands-on events where we'll be sharing actual data from these facilities as samples. Obviously, we've redacted it, but it's going to be stuff that we can actually touch and test on. And we really invite the community to join us in this free series of webinars and events that are starting on the 7th. So thank you very much to the Asset Leadership Network for hosting today's and the other webinars.
Well, thank you, Kimon and Young. Your support has been immeasurable. We wouldn't have been able to do this without you. So now I have email addresses if people are wanting to get in touch with people. There was a request for slides, so we will make those available. And Kimon had mentioned that it's been an aggressive schedule for this webinar series. Well, we've got to be aggressive to address the issues that we're talking about. We are chasing a very big objective, and it requires aggressive action. And I think what we're seeing is the breaking down of silos that I've been hearing about for so many years, and it's wonderful to be able to participate in all of these different activities that are actually breaking down the silos. And I feel we're going to be, we're on the brink of achieving what many people thought was not possible. So please stay tuned and keep in touch, and look forward to other activities that will be popping up in the summer and in the fall. Thank you all for your participation.